You don't suddenly wake up one morning and decide to cut everyone off. It usually starts with something much smaller. A conversation that leaves you feeling strangely drained. A message you hesitate to answer. A moment where you realize you've explained the same feeling for the fifth time, and nothing actually changed. At first, you try to ignore it. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You give people the benefit of the doubt. But slowly, something begins to shift. You stop explaining. You stop chasing. You stop trying to repair connections that were never truly mutual. And from the outside, it can look cold. People start asking questions like, why are you pushing everyone away? Why are you becoming so distant? Why can't you just forgive and move on? But what they don't see is everything that happened before that moment. Because people who cut everyone off usually didn't start that way. In fact, many of them started as the exact opposite. They were the people who tried the hardest, the ones who stayed too long, the ones who gave too many chances, the ones who believed that if they just explained themselves clearly enough, cared deeply enough, or forgave generously enough, things would eventually get better. But over time, something important begins to change. Not suddenly, gradually. You start noticing patterns. Certain people only show up when they need something. Some conversations always turn into criticism. Some relationships seem to thrive on chaos instead of care. And the more aware you become of these patterns, the harder it becomes to ignore them. Psychologists often describe this moment as a shift from emotional openness to emotional self-protection. It happens when your mind realizes that constantly giving more of yourself is slowly draining you. At first, you try to fix things. You communicate. You set boundaries. You explain how certain behaviors affect you. But when those attempts are ignored or minimized repeatedly, the nervous system begins to learn a new lesson. Connection without respect is not connection. And slowly, something inside you stops trying to repair what cannot be repaired. This is the point where many people begin to withdraw, not because they hate others, not because they stop caring, but because caring without reciprocity eventually becomes exhausting. A quiet realization begins to appear. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some connections belong only to a certain chapter of your life, and when that chapter ends, holding on too tightly can begin to damage your peace. For many people, cutting others off is not an act of anger. It's an act of clarity. It's the moment when you stop confusing loyalty with self-sacrifice. And that realization can be surprisingly uncomfortable, because society often teaches us that maintaining relationships at any cost is a sign of maturity. We often hear phrases like, family is everything. Real friends never walk away. Love means staying no matter what. But psychology tells a more complicated story. Healthy relationships are not defined by permanence. They are defined by safety, mutual respect, and emotional balance. When those elements disappear for long enough, the relationship stops nourishing you and slowly begins draining you instead. This is where many people face an internal conflict. Part of them still wants to believe that things will change, that if they just try harder, communicate better, or forgive one more time, the relationship can return to what it once was. But another part of them recognizes something different, the pattern. And once you see a pattern clearly, it becomes very difficult to pretend it isn't there. Eventually, the emotional cost becomes too high, and the person who once held everything together begins to step back. They answer fewer messages. They stop initiating conversations. They stop sharing personal thoughts. From the outside, this distance can look confusing, but internally, something very specific is happening. The mind is recalibrating. It's learning that peace is sometimes found not by fixing relationships, but by leaving them. This is why people who cut others off are often misunderstood. Many assume they are bitter, angry, or antisocial, but often the opposite is true. They are people who once cared deeply, people who invested enormous emotional energy into relationships that never truly supported them in return. Eventually, something inside them realizes a difficult truth. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your time, your attention, or your emotional world. And learning that truth does not make someone cold. It makes them aware. Because boundaries are not walls designed to isolate you from others. They are filters. They allow healthy people to enter while keeping harmful dynamics out. But here is where the story becomes more complex. Cutting people off can create peace, but it can also create loneliness. When you remove relationships that were unhealthy, you may suddenly notice how quiet your life becomes. Fewer messages, fewer invitations, fewer conversations. And for a while, that silence can feel strange, almost uncomfortable, because humans are wired for connection. Even imperfect connection can feel safer than none at all. But over time, something else begins to emerge. Clarity. Without constant emotional chaos, your mind becomes calmer. Your energy stabilizes. You begin to notice which relationships actually feel supportive rather than draining. And this is where an important psychological shift happens. Instead of maintaining many relationships out of obligation, you begin valuing fewer relationships that feel genuine. This idea is strongly supported by one of the longest psychological studies ever conducted. The Harvard study of adult development followed people for more than 75 years. Researchers wanted to understand what truly creates a fulfilling life. Not success, not money, not status, relationships, but not just any relationships. The quality of those connections mattered far more than the quantity. People with a small circle of emotionally supportive relationships were consistently happier and healthier than people surrounded by many shallow or stressful ones. In other words, having fewer people in your life is not a problem if the people who remain truly see you. And this is the quiet truth many people discover after cutting others off. Your world may become smaller, but it also becomes clearer. The noise fades, the drama fades, and the people who remain are the ones who respect your boundaries instead of fighting them. These are the relationships that feel calm instead of chaotic, supportive instead of competitive, safe instead of exhausting. Over time, you begin to realize something that once seemed impossible. Peace is not the absence of people. Peace is the presence of the right ones. And sometimes creating that space requires letting go of connections that were never meant to stay. If you've reached a point in your life where your circle has become smaller, there may be moments when you question yourself. Moments when you wonder if you became too distant, too selective, too guarded. But before assuming something is wrong with you, consider another possibility. Maybe you simply learned something important. Maybe you realize that protecting your energy is not selfish. Maybe you discovered that constant chaos is not the price you have to pay for connection. Maybe you understood that loyalty should never require abandoning your own well-being. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not cold. You are not heartless. You are not incapable of love. You are someone who learned the hard way that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. And instead of letting that lesson make you bitter, you chose something else. You chose peace. You chose clarity. You chose to build a life that feels calm instead of chaotic. And that choice, quiet as it may seem, is one of the strongest decisions a person can make. Because the goal was never to cut everyone off. The goal was always to protect what matters: your energy, your mental health, your ability to form connections that are real instead of draining. And if your circle is smaller now but filled with people who genuinely see you, respect you, and care about your well-being, then you didn't lose anything important. You simply made room for something better. Sometimes the circle becomes smaller before it becomes healthier. And if that's something you've experienced, you're not alone. Many people quietly reach the same realization.